Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Roth. I am the producer, creator, and host of the DEI Playbook. Over the next 90 minutes, you're going to be introduced to some of the most brilliant minds in corporate. Each of them comes from different backgrounds with different viewpoints and different styles in reaching their goals. One thing I make perfectly clear is that while it is a group and there are bound to be differences of opinions, this is a safe space. Within this safe space, they're able to converse freely, knowing that their opinion is going to be valued. These conversations are critically important, especially in an economy right now where the majority of DEI roles are being lost. I truly hope that once you leave here, you find value in something you could take back and implement in your daily life. Thank you so much again for joining us. Can't wait to hear your feedback. Please tell your friends. This is the DEI Playbook. So, hey everyone. My name is Dan Roth, and hopefully everybody could hear me. Chris, Ishan, Lori. Um, I want to start off by apologizing. We have overloaded our system a little bit. So, what's going to happen is, as opposed to having one huge panel, we're going to be talking to three at a time over the course of the next 90 minutes. As things adjust, we'll adjust with them. However, this is part of doing what we do in the streaming platform. So do me a favor, if you could hear me, if you could see me, please let me know and we will get started. So first, I want to say thank you to everybody that is joining us. Um, the starting three that we have here, I am going to have them introduce themselves and we'll get right into the discussion. I'm going to start off with Lori.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully, you can hear me well. My name is Lori Thibodeau, and I love diversity. I love to bring everybody to, I want everybody to have a seat at the table about each individual person and the authentic selves that they bring to the.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. As we're going through this, I'm trying to keep up with what's happening on all the different ends. So, the next person I want to introduce, for many that are in this space, needs no introduction. Um, I'm grateful to call him a mentor. Chris, over to you.
So my name is Chris Armstrong, and I am one half of Veritas Culture. And our focus is primarily to the root of the matter, to get to root focus and root solutions when it comes to culture and when it comes to diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. And we're very much facilitators, and we're very much guides on the side who make it about everyone else, and that's really our.
And Ishan, first of all, thank you for taking the time. I know that you're not home and that you're traveling for work. So I really appreciate it. Have a tremendous amount of gratitude for you being here. Please tell everybody who you are.
Thank you so much, Dan. And actually, I am home. I got in early, so thank you. My name is Ishan Peterson. I am a coach and consultant. I work in large systems for systems change from the DEI perspective. I'm so glad to be here today to talk with you all. Thank you.
You're very welcome, and thank you for being here. When shifts happen, especially within these live productions, it takes a certain cultivation, and the link there is that within the spectrum of DEI, it has a lot of similarities. There's constantly a need to adjust and shape. So my question to all of you, and please feel free to go in whatever order you want to go in, is the current iteration of DEI the same one that's going to be around in 5 years? Is it, do you even agree with the term DEI? What is the current landscape, and where do you feel like it's going? I'll send it over to Ishan.
So you asked three questions in there, so I'll tackle the first one. The first question was, is DEI going to look the same in 5 years? No. I think we're constantly shifting. I think things change with the times, right? Language changes, approaches changes, legislation changes, things that impact this space will continue to change. Therefore, we're going to need to continue to be agile and change with it. I think there are fundamental things that will always remain the same, such as constructs and those sorts of things won't change, but the way we do the work perhaps will.
Lori, over to you.
I think one of the main things that I see happening in the landscape of DEI is AI. And so not only do we have policies, and we're being tested with different policies that are coming through the Supreme Court, but also the way we communicate with each other is changing. So the fact that we have groups such as just artificial intelligence and understanding these different groups of biases that we come with as we train these different objects in place, we are going to be changing. It's no doubt about that. DEI has been changing from the very beginning of bringing people together to sit at the table. It's never unwound. I mean, if you go to a Thanksgiving dinner of different cultures, they may not have your turkey and mashed potatoes and sweet potatoes. They might have enchiladas. And so what we have to understand is that understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging and the history of the different groups of people has been evolving over time as we meet new groups of people and bring them into our table. So do I see DEI changing? Absolutely. Do I see that we're still struggling with some issues that we had 50 years ago? Absolutely. I think that, it's voices like ours coming together and really understanding what the issues are, and people on the other side being willing to listen and hear how they can also be advocates and allies is how we make an actual dent on the change that we actually want to see in the future.
I love that perspective, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you for bringing up the topic of AI, as I know that's a bit of a hot button topic right now. Chris, you have a bit of a different optics. Being part of a facilitation team, you're in a different place than most of our other panelists. So from that, I mean, I'm not going to ask you from a facilitator's perspective, but from your perspective, what's the core? Um, what do you see at the core foundation of where we've come from, and where do you see the core foundation in terms of where we need to go? Is it the same? Is it different? What are your viewpoints?
I think we've been way too attached to diversity and inclusion as the focuses. So we do things to try to increase diversity, do things to try to increase inclusion. We're already getting more diverse regardless of what practitioners do. And I mean that from a worldview, and certainly in this country. But this idea that we should keep focusing on diversity and inclusion to me is not only evolving to actually thankfully having people focus on equity and belonging, but that's where it needs to be. But I'll also tell you that's where the rub is, especially with practitioners, because what you have is you have um, more diversity, more intersectionality. You have social media, which puts all of this out into the forefront. And you have a lot of practitioners wondering, when we focus on belonging, who do we focus on? And no one wants the oppression Olympics, but there's still dialogue about, is this about the LGBTQA plus community? Is it about Blacks and African Americans and reparations? Is this about immigrants? Is this about, and although the answer theoretically should be it's about all of them, what's happening is, especially with, as you said at the beginning, Dan, sort of the divestment in DEIB, what's happening is practitioners are forced to sort of not only figure out what they're going to focus on, but figure out what to tell clients to focus on, because there's less time and less resources. We had sort of 2020 and 2021 was sort of like the pinnacle of investment in time from companies. But now that the reality set in and people are showing, frankly, how much they actually care, you have practitioners sort of wondering, if we're trying to do belonging for all, but we don't have enough resources to get there, or we don't have enough focus from clients and the powers that be, there's really a lot of discussion about what should the focuses be on, and can one group feel like they belong without harming another group's sense of belonging. Like, to me, those are real things that I see in the facilitation world. In equity, I'll just say, long story short, equity becomes a challenge because too many people still associate it with reverse discrimination, which of course doesn't exist. But because of limited resources and fears of losing jobs and all that kind of stuff, you have people, quote unquote, wanting to make things equitable, but then they're afraid of what's going to happen to them. Hence things like affirmative action. And I'll turn it back over to you, Dan.
So I want to give Ishan and Lori opportunity to respond because I want this to be an organic conversation, but I do want to ask, and all three of you could respond, do you feel, based on your response, do you feel that the labeling of DEI is doing more harm than good?
You want to start, Ishan?
Sure. I think it's not necessarily the labeling. I think we as humans naturally put labels on things. We try to put things in a box so that we can understand them. And so I don't necessarily feel it's the labeling. I think it's the approach, it's the work, it's the focus on diversity and inclusion versus equity and belonging. That's the problem. As someone who primarily focuses on advancing racial equity, primarily through my role, equity for me is at the center of everything that I do. And that's the place to start. And it is the hardest place to start for the reasons that Chris has said. And so, when you overlay race with any of those intersections, then you're able to even break down further the needs for equity to be the place to start. So if we as practitioners can be there together, that makes it easier. And when we're not there, it makes it much harder. And so I don't think it's the label. I think it's the approach and the focus. Lori?
I mean, recently I was asked, I was going to give I'm giving a presentation in the future, and the person asked me, well, Lori, there was some concern if your presentation was going to be woke. And hearing this types of thought process that's going on in the DEI space, we we have created very uncomfortable spots for people to sit down and have a meaningful conversation on how do we create change. I work specifically in healthcare. And so for me, equity means something even more different. It means when you come into our hospitals that you get the care that you need and you deserve. When you look at the difference between equal care and beyond the equal concept is the fact that there's systemic racism. There are certain things in place that certain people may not, that may need additional resources in order to help care for them and make sure that we make them whole again. And it's not I think that we've kind of come through this decisive language all of a sudden, where we're it's seen that we're against each other, but I think in actuality we need to look and see what do we have in common and how can we come together. I just I don't want us to be separated in those factors and lose meaning in the actual work that we're doing.
Before Chris goes, I do want to say, Lori, thank you for the response, but also congratulations on being named Woman of the Year.
Oh, thank you.
Chris, over to you.
I mean, I agree with both. I definitely agree with you, Sean, that it's not about the language or the labels. It never is. That's always a symptom. We're not products of our environment. We're products of how we respond to our environment, which really gets to what Lori said about the way some of us are responding is to sort of go against each other. And that shouldn't be the case at all, because what it does is if it gives fodder and fuel to the people who don't even want the efforts to happen at all. From a facilitation perspective, it's certainly from an assessment perspective, that is what I see happening. However, I see it all over LinkedIn on a daily basis. But to Dan, could the letters change? Yes. Some people have changed them. Used to be DNI, then it was DEI, then it was DEI and B. Some people are saying to add a J for justice. Some people are saying to add an A for accessibility. I don't think that the labels matter as much as the efforts and the focuses. And for clients and people who say they want to change, they're always going to need some kind of alphabet soup to help them even be able to think about the topic, let alone talk about it. So I don't think it's the letters. Back over to you, Dan.
So then let's dive into that, Chris, because you bring up a really good point. And when we look at the cyclical cycle of the U.S. economy, and I understand that DE&I is different iterations globally as opposed to just the U.S., one of the things that we notice is that this work has not been just since George Floyd. It's been going on for a long time, but there's these cycles where it seems to be pushed up to the forefront more than others, and then it kind of comes down and it's these hills. So from your perspective, from the three of your perspective, what needs to change? How do we actually create a solution-based economy where we can create that sustainable momentum that leads to more equity and equality?
People have to care.
How do you
And
get
I
them
know
to?
that sounds flippant. Here's what I would say. We talked for decades about the business case for diversity, which in and of itself is a problematic concept, because what it basically says is that we have to convince people that diversity should matter to them. But that concept, it proves that it's not inherently something people are going to care about. And when I see people, I mean non-lived experiencers primarily. How do you get them to care about it? I got to be honest. I don't see that as an easy answer for two reasons. One, even if they care about it, the question will be, do they care about it as much as their own safety and their own future? When somebody pits equity for all against, well, what does that do to white men? And I'm just using that as an example. They might be able to care for equity for all, but not as much as they care about, their own future. I think the second thing that makes it difficult is to get people to care. It is, and you know this, Dan, is the number one root issue to negative or to diversity problems is high personal association. We don't see people and things as they are; we see them as we are. So even if they care about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that doesn't mean that they believe in or agree with systemic racism, for instance. And if you don't believe in systemic racism, then you're going to perceive any lack of diversity, you're going to perceive any lack of representation as a matter of best qualified, and not as a matter of systemic racism. So the way to get people to care is to get them to actual. That's all I say. Over to you, Ishan.
Chris, I think you're right down the path that I would go down. For me, it's apathy. Folks are apathetic to what they don't see their self-interest and self-value in. And so, it's easy to in the periods where there is social unrest, right? George Floyd, for example, right? There's social unrest. It's easy to step up in those moments because lots of people are doing it. It's easy to, put a post on your social media in support of something. It's harder to do other things. It's harder to be active. It's harder to go somewhere and speak up. It's harder to really do that self-reflection and say, what am I doing? How am I acting? How am I showing up in a different way if you don't see that self-interest and that self-value? And then at some point, we always think someone else is doing it. Right. And so people become apathetic, right? Versus empathetic and really moving from that direction. And so, Chris, you said most of what I would say, but that's what I would add. Lori?
I would say if you look at the history of the United States of America and where we were in the past, it started with some people caring, but maybe not all people. It took the government with Medicare just to kind of allow for different groups, different hospitals, in order for them to desegregate by giving them an incentive for Medicare. So, I mean, it wasn't something like everybody go play nice in the sandbox and everything is going to be okay. So it was a force maneuver in order to bring people into the space of diversity. And I mean, we could look even further on into history and see these different things that are taking place. But I think what United States of America could benefit from is the global perspective of what other organizations are doing across the world. When we look at France and the fact that France and Spain and a few other different countries, they have policies to have certain quotas so they could have women on the board. Do we, when we're still looking at spaces of inclusivity and we say, well, I can't get to the top, I don't really see the representation there, we have to kind of build that. And it might start with care, but if you've never had interactions with certain groups of people, then you may not see them in your specific workplace culture. And so you have to be able to bring those people in. You have to be able to, build some type of relationship so that people can get along. Right now, if we look at workplace measures, what we'll see is that if you look at the top, you see a lot of white males at the top. And the question mark would be, are there other forms of diversity at the top? Disability often gets missed out of the entire conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Are there any of African American, disability, women, religious diversity, all of these different characters, are any of them being represented at the top? And the answer might be no. And then you have to ask yourself, why not? Is it because we have a legacy of creating certain people, certain places, get certain opportunities? Is it because they went to certain universities and they were accepted into those universities? What types of actions do we have, and how do we find a place where we can come together? I don't think it's a woke issue. I think it's an issue of looking and seeing who may be experiencing the gaps and how we can be able to close those gaps. I'm not a disabled individual, but I tell you that every day that I walk into a space, and I look in and examine that space to say, wow, can a person who is disabled, can they equally walk through this space? Or is my parking, did I have to park really far? Are these types of things holding people back? I think we have to look at it as, how can we be allies for each other? And yes, they do have to care, but we might need a little bit of pull and tug at certain levels in order to get those changes to help take place.
So, first of all, I want to thank you for bringing up disability, and I want to remind everyone there's both visible and invisible disability. By American with Disability Act, I'm considered disabled, uh, but you wouldn't know that by looking at me, which is why we can't make assumptions. Something I want to touch on, and just so everybody knows, I need to preface this with two things. When Chris says I already know, I just want to be clear and transparent. I met Ishan and Chris through the Diversity to Belonging facilitation prep as part of Veritas culture. So I want to be clear on that. Also, the way that this is going to work is for about another 10-15 minutes, this group is going to be on. Then I'm going to take the other three that are here with us. They're going to come on. And then at the end, I'm going to go into individual questions to make sure that each of our panelists gets to be heard. This is a slight deviation, again, because of the technical issues we're facing. But one thing I wanted to touch on based on what each of you said is I look at things like redlining. I look at the differences within the segregation when people came over to the United States. Jews were in one place, and then you had African Americans and Latinos in different places. Do you think the segregation aspect of it has permeated to a point where there's almost a battle for validation within the corporate structure? And it's whoever wants to go.
I don't know that I understand the question, to be honest.
So what I'm asking, Chris, and I kind of sensed that is one of the things that we see in corporate is we talk about all these different ERGs. You have your Latino ERGs, you have your Black ERGs, your disabled ERGs, and each one is given a certain allotment of funding and otherwise. But what I'm saying, I've personally seen happen is that there's almost this ingrained combativeness or how do I put this? Fight to get the same resources, to get the same quality. So what I'm asking is, do you think that the large collective, the formulation, the way that we went about creating this economy has knowingly exacerbated an issue in order to drive wedges?
This is what I said very early in my answers earlier. I said, so because of how diversity is an organic thing that's already happened, but what's happening is marginalized communities are having to fight for limited resources, limited attention, limited focus. And do I think it's intentional? Not all the time, but sometimes for sure. Like I will never say everything's always intentional because I don't like stereotypes and generalizations. But to be honest with you, I don't care if it's intentional. I care about the impact, right? And what I think is happening is senior leaders, organizations know that there's limited resources, limited capacity, limited time, and they're forcing these ERGs to make decisions. Which if the ERGs are smart, and they are, then they have to sort of come together and figure out how to make decisions that benefit all ERGs. And then you end up getting 6 recommendations approved out of 180 that should be approved. But at the organizational level, what they'll say is, well, sorry, we can only do 6, but that's the resources we have. Well, the resources we have, though, are a product of systemic racism. And so this is why I say you do have to care and you have to believe in systemic racism, or you're going to keep tying it down to limited resources, which becomes a symptom. Ishan, over to you.
What comes up for me in hearing you speak is that focus on the systemic racism. Policies, practice, procedures are developed by people, individuals. And so if individuals want those things to change, individuals can change those things, right? And so the onus on the ERG groups and the resourcing, that is really about the policy, practices, and procedures of that organization and how they interpret, how they use that to either help or harm, right? Their groups. And so I think that's what's important, is to remember that this isn't about recreating systems. It's about how we are recreating systems. It's how we are legislating those systems. It's how we are creating practices and policies to keep these systems within a box, even if it is the ERGs in our organizations. And what do we do about that, right? Someone can say that, to get the individual to care is the most important part. You will hear other practitioners say that focusing on the systemic pieces, the institutional systemic pieces, are the most important part. But the truth is, you have to do both at the same time, and strategically, in order to make impact in this particular space. Lori?
I would say I actually love ERGs. Um, I've actually, founded a few ERGs, and so I really understand the meaning behind the ERGs. I think one of the things that's not really addressed throughout all ERGs is that um, all groups can form ERGs. So that's also an option. I know that some groups have some groups are just a little bit more diverse. So for me, on the ERG concept, I think it's a good way to bring people together, and you have to be as as a DEI practitioner, you have to be intentional about how you have that group, and then how do you also build allyship in the same way to make others feel like they're included and that they can belong. From my perspective, I look at a lot of health inequity, and the reason why we're looking at that is because we're looking at it from a healthcare space. So we're looking to see if there's issues that is going on specifically within our community, and how we can help solve those issues that are occurring. This affects our patients that are coming in, and so it's building a network to make people understand and explain those concepts. You know, if some areas are hit more, it's about understanding this is the community that we serve, and this is how we should address those issues. Now, you mentioned earlier about specifically redlining and certain things that have taken place completely outside of ERGs, but in that whole redlining and all of these laws that have taken place, yes, I think it was on the basis of survival. I mean, I literally think that people have been pitted against each other for the limited resources that they do have on the basis of survival. And if they don't survive, they cling to what they can get access to. And we probably haven't been all taught how do we play nicely in the sandbox with limited resources and connect everyone together. But because I run a women's group, a few of them, I'm able to bring different women together, and they come from all different races, religions, ethnicities, and different backgrounds, where I can say, where we can have like literal discussions, and it can be like, me too. And, it's very interesting from a religious perspective as well as racial perspective, and all the other different perspectives that they bring. The fact that they are being able to break down those barriers that have separated them before, because they're considered different. They've been put in silos, even though they do have intersectionalities that can actually bring them together. So I think when we can have an even bigger discussion, and we can bring in allies from other groups, and just have a more meaningful depth of conversation, we can really begin to close those gaps even more so, beyond just a women's ERG.
And I love that perspective. And I'm going to be very transparent. I asked that question knowing the work that you have done within ERGs, Lori, and I was really excited to get your perspective on that. I'm not here today to provide my personal opinion, but I definitely understand the value for anybody that's read uh, my newsletters. So, one of the big issues that I have with events that go on is there's always um, there's always philosophical conversation and very little practical advice. So with this last portion that we have together, understanding sort of the dynamics. I want to get all of your perspective on what can actually be done. What are tangible goals that we can put into place as a society to create actionable change? I know that's a loaded question.
That's a huge question. Uh, I'll say one thing. We have to get past individual shame and guilt. We got to get past, the scarcity mindset. We got to get past the what about me-isms versus the what about us-isms, right? Like we have to, as individuals and as a society, care more about each other, which means we have to talk about racism and anti-racism and anti-Black racism, which is a whole nother thing, right? We have to be able to have those challenging conversations. And then, most importantly, hold people accountable. You can put all the strategies in place in the world. You can have the greatest ERGs. You can have lots of amazing things going on and approaches going on without accountability, without consequence and discipline. Those things won't matter. Right? And so we have to figure out a way to hold ourselves accountable as a society as well.
Chris, I'm going to go over to you because I'm going to close this segment before we go to final word with Lori, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. I would just say, at the end of the day, training in and of itself doesn't change hearts and minds. Events, as you said, don't change hearts and minds. And what's needed is heart and mind change. Well, how do you get to heart and mind change? Even accountability is a symptom, because why don't we hold people accountable, right? As Sean said earlier, policies are created, interpreted, and followed or not by people. It's all about heart and mind change. What I've seen as the most effective way to change hearts and minds, and I'm not saying it always works, but the most effective way to change hearts and minds is to get out of the structure of safe space discussions. I put safe space in quotes because no one should ever say this is a safe space. You don't get to decide that for people. But whether it's training, whether it's focus groups, whether it's events for History Month, whether it's safe space discussions, they're overly structured because we're scared of what people are going to say. We're scared of letting people have sort of real dialogue, and we got to get out of that, because once we can start putting it on the table, and once we can start letting people sort of not just put their needs on the table, but other people put their concerns on the table, and let those conversations flow and then come up with recommendations. We're afraid of that right now because we're afraid of cancel culture, even though there's no such thing as cancel culture. We're afraid of litigation. We're afraid of all of these things that prevent real work. So we have Band-Aid solutions. I'll leave it at that. So Dan, back over to you.
Actually, I'm turning it over to Lori. Thank you.
I agree with everything that was just said. Accountability is really important, and as you say, Dan, we have a lot of philosophical messages that we're transpiring, trainings that we're doing, and that's all good, but that is not action. We really have to look very deeply into what we're working on. So if it's the policies that just doesn't make sense, we need to examine it, and how are people affected? What does that mean for certain groups of people? Um, just look at those different spaces. And I think we have to look at it from every single angle that we possibly can. Certain areas, I think I feel like we all have this soft spot, and so we all tend to focus on certain areas. But if we're going to look at intersectionality, that's great. And then we also need to focus on these other areas as well. We have 5 generations that are in the workforce, and we all have to come play nice in the sandbox. Well, different generations are going to have different wants and needs, and then you put all these other aspects that they have in place. So we have to look at the workforce, or we have to look at society, and we have to determine what are the issues, what are the gaps, and really come up with key metrics. We can't move things around if we're afraid to share the metrics. I believe in process improvement, but you can't have process improvement if you don't know what your baseline was. So looking at that baseline and looking at how you can improve and not being afraid of it. So I 100% agree with everybody on those specific concepts.
I really appreciate that, Lori, and thank you all three of you for touching on, because I think one of the things we get hammered down on is creating these philosophical conversations, and then um, people are left with the same questions that they came into those conversations with, instead of practical ideations of what they could actually be doing, which is a huge problem. Before we switch over to our next group, I want to give each of you an opportunity to have a final word of the message that you want to get across. Whatever you want it to be, in regards to DEI and corporate, whatever. It's up to you. Lori, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go Lori, Chris, and then Ishan.
Sure. I think what I want people to take away from this DEI playbook is that it's going to be changing and evolving over time, and that what is spoken today may transform and evolve over tomorrow. And so it's about keeping an open mind, being willing to learn and listen from others, have a conversation, sit down with people. There's so many different groups of people to learn from. Take that as an opportunity. And then with that, I think action plans and metrics and, making sure that you have the data of examining how we move forward. Philosophical, that's great, but we have to look beyond the philosophical and really get to the meat and start solving some of the issues.
Um, I, I think most of it is, I wouldn't call it in the philosophical, but I do think most of it is in the hearts and minds. I think the data is informed by the hearts and minds. Hiring, who we hired, is informed by our biases and beliefs, who we promote. So all the data points that people look for when they ask for a business case for diversity are influenced by hearts and minds. How we write policy depends on how we think about the subject behind the policy. So my lead behind would be get out of the business case for diversity mindset, because what it does is three things. One, it makes people a transactional number, which they're not. Two, it implies that if business is good, then you don't need diversity, which of course is wrong. But it also takes out the humanity of it and makes efforts like belonging and inclusion sort of, side focuses. We've heard enough leaders who say things like, you can't measure feelings, feelings aren't facts. How do I know if someone belongs? And we steer them towards, well, look at the business case, look at the business case. People are not a business, at least we shouldn't be treating it as such. Over to you, Ishan.
Thank you, Chris. I would agree with everything that's been shared. For me, it's the hearts and minds. Do the work, right? Stop giving yourself excuses around fear and shame and guilt. Recognize it, acknowledge it, and then move past it. Be courageous because you have to, and it's contagious, right? So that other people can find spaces so that they can show up in that way. Don't just talk about it, be about it, right? And I'll lastly say strategy is everything, right? You may have to be more strategic in particular spaces in order to move things along, and that's okay, but do it anyway.
Sorry about that. I was adjusting the screen a little bit. I want to thank the three of you. I know that this wasn't exactly what you signed up for when you decided to come on, but the conversation was great. I want to definitely say thank you. Before we go, where can we find each of you? Do you have any events coming up? Ishan, Chris, and then Lori.
Sure. You'll find me on LinkedIn, Ishan Peterson, and then also on ishanpeterson.com. No events coming up.
When's the podcast launching?
The podcast is launching in October. Cross your legs at the ankle. I know that sounds really interesting, but it's challenging what it means to be a woman in today's society.
Chris, over to you.
Chris Armstrong. You can find Vince and I, because I don't facilitate by myself. I don't believe it, particularly not in this space. You can find Vince and I at veritasculture.com. And we do have a podcast called Talking on Eggshells, which is really about having difficult dialogue and not skimming on the dialogue, because that's where we got to get to. Over to you. Lori.
Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's Lori Thibodeau. That's Lorie. I like to make sure people know I have an E on my name. Um, Find me on LinkedIn. There's tons of events that are coming up that I'm involved with. Love to meet and learn from you. Back to you, Dan.
So thank you again. As I mentioned in sort of our back end chat, Fulgens and I are going to be talking to our streaming partners, and I promise you, everyone, this will not be the time you see the three of these amazing individuals on this show. I appreciate all of you. As I bring on our next three guests, I want to mention one person that couldn't be here today. Uh, she is one of my absolute best friends in the entire world. Her name is Sharita Washington. Uh, we did have. Here, let me message Fulgens. I need him. Um, so Sharita was supposed to be here, and I can't get into the exact reasons why she wasn't. But when it comes to DEI, I couldn't be where I'm at without her. She's become family to me, and there's very few people that I know that are as meaningful in the space. If you do want to learn more about Sharita, though, Healing Our Future, uh, which is the podcast that I do with Future Kane, we do have 2 episodes with her. You could definitely check them out. Also, before we get into this, I do want to mention that we do have a couple of amazing sponsors that I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up. Ecamm Live, that is our streaming partner. Katie Fox, who I seem to think is the head of the entire thing, but she would yell at me she wouldn't yell at me. We have Opus Clips, which we're going to be producing a lot of the micro content from. And then Giza Coffee, which is a friend of mine, Jonas. His mother created a coffee company. I'll be posting all those. Also, Crystal, since she's here, was gracious enough to put together a huge resource guide that we have accessible for anybody that wants it. So that it's not just enough for us to come on here and talk about these things, but if you're looking for further information, we have a free resource guide. Feel free to reach out to me and we'll get that for you. So with that being said, and without further ado, thank the three of you for being here. I'm extremely excited. Before there was a little bit of an issue, so I wasn't really in my zone yet. So I want to do this. Heidi is a communications expert specifically in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion. She has been one of my biggest supporters for the last 3 years and is absolutely tremendous. She's going to introduce herself in a second. Crystal Howard, I literally wouldn't be sitting here without. When I first got into DEI in corporate, she is the one that was able to say, this is how you remove the red tape. This is where you have to go. Nothing I was able to accomplish would have been done without her guidance, without her wisdom, and without her knowledge. Fulgens Henry is better than me at almost everything that I do. And Anna is better than him because I have to say that for my own health. Anna Gill is his better half. I'm just going to leave that there. But Fulgens works with our streaming partner, Ecamm Live, and the work that he does is so dynamic that we started becoming friends. And then I realized he has 12 years in nonprofit within the Haitian community. And this was an opportunity for me to put him front and center and show off his knowledge, just like Crystal, just like Heidi. So let's go left to right on my screen. Heidi, please introduce yourself and what you specialize in within DEI, and then we'll go Crystal and Fulgens.
Dan, thank you so much. This is awesome. I'm just happy to be with these wonderful people. My name again is Heidi Barker, and I am a DEI communications professional. So I'm a communicator by trade, former journalist, segued into corporate communications, and then I decided to specifically focus communications work in DEI. Over to you, Crystal.
Hi, everyone. My name is Crystal Howard. I am a DE&I program manager for global supply chain. And I would say that I specialize in many things, but my biggest area that is my favorite is changing culture and inclusive leadership.
Thank you so much, Dan. Hello, everyone. I'm Fulton Henry. I am a certified nonprofit executive, former deputy executive director of a nonprofit management experience of 12 years of experience, servicing the Black and Brown community, particularly Caribbean communities. And I'm currently a live video producer and content creator, applying everything that I've learned through my 12 years of experience servicing the nonprofit community and helping local communities also with their video marketing.
So I want to provide full disclosure. I do partner with Fulgent on a number of projects, and apparently my daughter wants to see what I'm doing. Fulgence has learned the hard way what happens when my daughter comes on air live. We would have to bleep a lot of stuff out. So I want to start off this discussion, and I'm going to be very honest. I'm going to position this in a way that I think is going to benefit all three of you, but I want to be nice to Heidi. One of the things that gets talked about potentially the least often is the communication styles that are intrinsic to being active within diversity, equity, and inclusion. Heidi, can you talk about the intricacies and how DEI communication may differ to your traditional corporate?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think it should be Nice to Heidi Day. So thank you. That's great. So I think, let me back up a little bit. I think traditionally, DEI practitioners have been plucked from functions such as legal or human resources. And in the last 5 years or so, I have seen a trend that they're also plucking from communications. And I think that that is brilliant, not just because I'm a communicator, but because just like legal and just like HR, communications has our tentacles sort of all over the organization. And we've got great sources and great information. We know how to dig and get great information. So I think that communicators make excellent DEI practitioners. I have a number of folks that I came up with in the corporate communications and journalism fields that are now practicing in diversity, equity, inclusion. So to get back to your question, I think that communicators have a certain sensitivity and appreciation for words and for meanings, and how can we express this in the most concise way possible, in the most compelling way possible, and really be able to draw people into what we are trying to say. And that's super important when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, because of all the complex messages that we have to convey, and the way that the field and the landscape has changed, the American landscape and also the global landscape, in the last 3 years when it comes to racial justice, social justice, and the word sound that we use matters. And communicators, that's what we do for a living. So I think that that is one of the reasons why it's important to look at your communications function as great partners and possibly practitioners when it comes to DEI.
Crystal, I'm going to turn this over to you, but I want to step in because you taught me how to communicate within the world of DEI. So here's going to be sort of the slight pivot as you respond. When you're dealing within a system of red tape, is there a methodology that you use that has a better ability to get results when you are trying to push that DEI communication than others? And if so, what does that look like?
So I think because I had a sales background, of extensive sales background before I got into DE&I, I think it's helped me a lot with my communication. I think that in general, we all know that DE&I is a very sensitive topic to talk about. It makes people feel instantly uncomfortable as soon as you say that you're going to talk about DEI. They don't know what you're going to talk about. And I think really you have to go in with having extreme empathy for the fact that my experience in the world might not align with the person that I'm about to have a conversation with. And so if I can make it comfortable for that person to put their wall down, for us to truly connect and really understand what we're trying to accomplish, to me, I've learned in my experience that I've been able to, connect with leadership and managers that have been vulnerable enough to share with me some of their thoughts that they probably wouldn't have said out loud just because they felt comfortable, because I created a space for them to feel comfortable and I truly wanted to understand their perspective. If you come from like a learn and be curious and you have a lot of empathy, I think it's okay that some people really truly don't understand. I mean, we all come from different upbringings, and really what's driving my journey versus someone else really is going to do a lot to do with their life experiences and where they were raised and what was their experience in the world. And so I think it's important to try to be empathetic. You could be passionate about what you want to get across and what you want to do, but at the end of the day, you really have to be able to break down that uncomfortableness layer that stands between me and somebody else to build that trust so that they feel like, okay, this person's not trying to attack me and trying to push me to do something, but they truly want to understand my perspective and my thoughts. And I feel comfortable enough to be honest with that person and be vulnerable enough to share what some of my, setbacks might be or what my perceptions are. And I think that's okay too. Because I think if we can live in a world where we respect different perspectives, then I feel that we'll be better off in DEI in general. If we can just take that down and realize that some people really truly don't understand your life experience and we don't understand theirs, I think that's really where I feel that things change and you can cultivate change is really connecting with the person.
The problem with bringing your friends on is that I have like 60,000 follow up questions for you. But I have to get over to Fulgens. Fulgens, the first question that everybody wants to know
Sorry.
is, what are you wearing and where can people get it? I joke with Fulgens a lot with with that. Okay, no, seriously, Fulgens, I want to say thank you, Crystal, for that. I'm definitely going to be following up. You gave me a really great lean in. Fulgens, hopefully nobody can hear that. My daughter is crying, probably because her iPad died, but that's okay. Um, Fulgens, whereas Heidi and Crystal are coming from the corporate sphere, you are outlier, but in a great way. I say that because having worked specifically within the Haitian community and all the work that you did with the LGBTQI plus, you've really been able to tackle a lot of these things. I don't want to call it on a micro level because I don't think it's micro, but on a very focused platform. How do you feel like the communication style is when you're working with one specific group versus larger entities?
Thank you for that. And it's interesting enough that with my background, I don't carry a DEI label per se, and I've been just doing this work, right? And it's just part of it's just who I am, and in my passion and my beliefs and how I was raised, and I just do the work before I even knew the DEI labels and what DEI stood for and whatnot, right? Uh, and opening the doors of a nonprofit in a Caribbean community where where I was brought in, and I'm just being introduced to, there are all these stigmas around when it comes to the Caribbean community and LGBTQIA plus community members and being able to coexist and whatnot. And on top of that, having funders kind of like shifting funding sources per se, shifting funding towards, okay, now that you're providing these social services, you have to provide these social services for specific populations. Now you have to target uh, uh, gay men, MSM, which is male having sex with men of color, right? And 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 keeping in mind that you're in a organization with traditional Caribbean folk, traditional Haitian folk, starting from the board members down to the staff that services the community. Nothing wrong with that. Start to communicate or do outreach to a population they're not used to. It can create some challenges, whether they're open minded to it or not. And now it's a matter of being able to bring in uh, people, bring in resources that are able to do that work, who are able to resonate and identify with the target population that you're trying to serve, right? And that is part of the change also, and also being open minded, just being a regular human being is like, hey, we need to bring on LGBTQIA plus into our nonprofit. We need to bring this community. We need to open up the doors to them, because how is it that we're going to serve a population if we're not educating the matter? We need to actually have the right people in place to give us the sensitivity training and learn about different cultures and whatnot. And you won't know until you try. In population, everyone was receptive to it. Even the community that we're trying to service, no one really said anything. And it's just like there's a lot of perception out there, and you won't know how to tackle the perception until you start applying some work.
So thank you for providing that perspective, because I don't think that's one that, no, I know for a fact it's one we don't get very often. Heidi, Crystal, I just want to present you an opportunity to follow up on anything. If you don't, then we'll go into a different component of the conversation. But there's so much there with what Fulgen said. I mean, I'll be very honest. My first thought was whether or not, like, we talk about DEI and data, and Fulgens, I'm going to make an assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like from the nonprofit front, it wasn't as much about utilizing the data to show why things needed to be done, but it was more about finding that humanistic approach that led to the openness to dive into those things. Do I have that correct? Fulgens, can you hear me?
I kind of missed the last part, Dan. There
Yeah,
was a little bit of buffering there.
yeah, you seem to be cutting out a little bit. So my question is, from the perspective of the nonprofit, do you feel like getting responses was more based on the human perspective, or do you think it had more to do with the data on showing why things should be cared about?
Absolutely, more so from the human perspective, and also being able to not just have the conversation, but being the first to actually initialize the conversation, right? Initiate the conversation. I'm trying to say of being able to have an open mind and bring in new members through our doors, and being able to uh, do provide outreach and resources for people that we are not used to working with and not used to providing services to, right? Because we've always we always have good intentions, but the thought never crosses the mind about, hey, um, we're we're in this pocket here, and we don't have to stay in this pocket. There's so much more that we can open up our doors to. There's so much more people that we can provide services to. There's so many other communities that are lacking these type of services that we're culturally competent enough to provide to the community, right? So it's a matter of starting that conversation, and most of the time, especially from my experience, that everybody was actually open minded to it. It was just a matter of starting the conversation.
I gotta be honest. Um, this response is exactly why I wanted people to see you. But I also am listening to this, and I'm going to make a connection. So we have Crystal talking about really bridging the gap and getting to people on an individual level. We have Heidi talking about the corporate communication strategy, and we have you talking about uh, that very personal outlook. But one of the things that we know right now is that companies are being data driven. So my question is, how do we get companies in corporations to go from looking at the communication of DE&I from a data-based approach to a humanistic perspective where we can have those open and honest conversations without having our mouths taped. That's the nice way I'll put it. Heidi, I will go over to you.
Yeah, I'll jump in. And I really resonated with what Fulgene said, because I worked in nonprofit, leading DEI nonprofit, for about a year before I came to the corporation where I work now. And I think that what resonated with me was just the awareness factor and the education factor, and making sure that your peers are that they have at least the greens fees of DEI as they make the decisions on who's going to get these grants, right? Who's going to get the money, and making sure that their world and their level of empathy to link back to what Crystal is saying is there, because these are big decisions that are being made. Now, to your question about data, one of my DEI mentors, Dr. Nicholas Pierce, told me, you can't move what you don't measure. You can't move what you don't measure. And so if we're not getting that measurement, if we're not getting that data, then we can't expect to make any movement. And that impact that we want to make on the human side is not going to happen if we don't have the data to back it up. You at least have to have some proof points in order to get, to me, it's just, you've got to have A to get to B. At the corporate level especially, data is crucial for anything that you're going to try to get in your budget. For anything that you want to get live off the ground, you've got to have the data points to prove it. And in a function like DEI, where you're not getting rings at the register, so to speak, you've got to find some other data points to back you up as to why it's important. Crystal?
I agree with you 100%. I think data is what's driven most of my decision making in my D&I professional experience, and it will continue to. It has to drive that. It has to drive every conversation, because then it prevents from like biases coming into play, right? When you can show data, there's nothing to talk about. It's crystal clear exactly what that looks like and what are the things we're going to do to attack it, and then how are we measuring towards reaching whatever it is that shared goal is, and being focused on the results. I think is important. There is a human aspect too, and a lot of it, to me, in my opinion, we're all on different DE&I journeys, and so we have to understand that everyone is in a different place in that journey. And how do we benchmark where everyone's at to really truly understand as an organization, like, where's the majority of our leadership team, and how do we help support them in these different levels of where they're at in their journey. And that's the part that I'm the most like passionate about, just because if you can have that impact, then I know that will result in transforming culture change, because at the end of the day, our leaders are the ones who are going to drive and model the behavior for what we call as norm in the workplace. At the end of the day, somebody's not going to interrupt a female in the middle of a meeting if they know that their manager has kind of cultivated this culture where it's not acceptable, right? But nobody wants to be the one to be like, hey, can you let her finish speaking? I mean, this happens often in corporate America where a female's talking and they get interrupted, right? I think everybody has seen that in some part of your corporate experience. But how do we make it comfortable for everyone to say, you know what, we all feel comfortable enough to say, hey, we don't think that's right. And not calling somebody out, but calling them in, right? Nobody wants to be called out. They want to be called in, and just gentle reminders of this is important. And I think until people it's a new muscle, right, that not all of us have developed. And until our society gets comfortable and stop putting people in boxes and us stop seeing people as these segmented groups, then I feel then that will change. And we're not talking about the LGBT community versus disability group versus Latinos group. Like, I feel like that's the problem. And that's just the way the society has been brought up, is these boxes. And if we can get away from the boxes, then we're just looking at people like a human being. Just like I'm looking at the three of you, is I'm looking at you as a human. I'm no longer looking at it from, oh, you're black or this is your background. And I feel like that's more of a societal issue and it transitions into corporate America. And that's what I'm hoping in the future that we get to is we get to a place where we see everyone for who they are and not what they are and not question where they're from. And, I've dealt with my own identity issues and I have a different identity in the workplace of how people look at me versus outside of work. It's so night and day different.
Fulgence, over to you.
Yeah, I would also like to add the organizational culture mix or clash or whatever you want to call it, right? Because, for example, at the board level can be policy driven, and then from the staff or executive level, then you can have whether it's impact driven, data driven, or just a mixture of everything. And then there's also a challenge, but there's also not necessarily a challenge, but opportunity to make everything work at the same time, right? Because now the staff who are at the forefront, they're not necessarily thinking, hey, I'm from a data driven standpoint, but it's more from like a community driven, a purpose driven. I was put here for a purpose to service my community. I love doing what I do. I love interacting with people. I love helping people. And the more of that they put out, then the numbers will speak for itself, right? Because we do have to service our community, but at the same time, we have the funders, right? And the funders, I feel like some of the funding sources, as we just mentioned earlier, do create some type of separation, right? Because this funding is for Black gay men of color. This funding is for women of color. This funding is for right, and it's like separating everything. And then on top of the separation, now you have to think about how am I going to meet my deliverables on a monthly basis and please my funders, right? But just bringing back to the human standpoint and the purpose driven, the community driven standpoint, the more that just holding on to those values definitely helps. And from my experience, it's having those type of people and being able to work with those type of people, regardless of what your background is, regardless of what your sexual preference, orientation is, just us coming together as human beings to service the community just made a big impact and continues to make impact to this day.
Sorry, I'm not sorry. I had to pause and just kind of smile there for a second. Um, I don't want to lose this moment because listening to the three of you and listening before, it's hard sometimes to pause in the moment and realize when true impact is being made, when things are being said that will make a monumental difference to those watching. We had over 1,200 people respond to this, and there are moments from each of you. There are moments from Chris and Ishan and Lori before that I know are going to change people's lives, and I just wanted to sit in that moment for a second because that's why we do what we do. Heck, that's why I had you on, Fulgence. So you just proved me right, and I think you just probably proved something to yourself you didn't know. Sienna, so really quickly, we originally were scheduled to go and wrap up at 3. We started late, so I have a little bit of flexibility, but it's up to you. I want to be respectful of each of your time. So if you need, just let me know, and we will work on things. But before we do that, one of the things that I know from now, I'm going to move over to Crystal, because something that I learned very much from you is the ambiguity of visual representation and how we cannot make assumptions based on how we perceive someone to look. And it kind of goes, it creates a juxtaposition, because in corporate, and we're just talking about data, you want to make sure that as you're interviewing, you have representative panels. But you can't ask somebody if they fit into this particular box. So I'm going to ask the three of you, when it comes to creating resources that guarantee diversity, what is the best way to go about it, in your opinions, if we can't make those assumptions and we can't ask those questions that would truly define whether or not we're actually uh, being responsible? Any one of the three of you?
I was going to say that I just think that um, it's important to identify and give our diverse talent opportunities to develop. They need to have something they're taking away from this experience, be instead of just, hey, being tokenized as like the only on every single interview loop. So it's important to educate them on various, career development programs that would help them get something from the experience. Like at the end of the day, they're thinking, what's in it for me? But also they don't want to be like overly used either. So like, and to me, it wouldn't matter if they were this or not. I just think that everyone's always thinking about what's in it for me when I'm taking my time to do anything regarding anything extra that you're volunteering for. And so I think that you should be focusing on what's in it for them versus, hey, we need some diverse talent to show up to this interview loop. Do you mind always attending? It's like, that's really tokenizing the person. I think you need to focus on like, what do you want them to get from the experience that's going to benefit their career? And I think if it's positioned that way, naturally your diverse talent will volunteer for these experiences because they feel like they're seen more as not a commodity, but more of, hey, like this is what's going to benefit me from my work experience or whatever it is that you're trying to develop in.
So, in your opinion, what you're saying is create opportunities where they can volunteer with definitive benefits, as opposed to targeting and going individually and saying, "Hey, I need you for this."
Absolutely. Because, I know a lot of people from all different backgrounds that are strong allies and that have helped people, diverse talent, actually develop in their career. So I'm not saying that they all have to be in that background realm, but I've also seen where those people actually have brought in people and said, hey, like I have no diversity in my hiring loop. Can you come and shadow my call? And then the person instantly connects with this person. I just think in general, we can't look at it from just one angle. It's not just about gender and race. It could be diversity of perspective. Like if you're always having the same 5 people, now you're creating group like thoughts. So that becomes a bias. So I think you have to look at it as a standpoint of more than just those two focuses.
Got it. Heidi, I know that you have to hop off in a little bit, so I'm going to ask you for your response. But then before we go over to Fulgens, I'm going to ask you to tell people where they could find you if you have any events and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Dan. A couple of things that Crystal sparked in terms of the corporate landscape. In my career, throughout my career, I've seen different corporations show up to diversity targeted job fairs. And sometimes the company, they might not even have positions available, but they wanted to be seen at said job fair. And that really does a disservice to the talent pipeline when they come to your booth and they want to talk to you, but there might not be anything available. I remember distinctly when I was like 18 or 19, and I was at a Black Journalists Conference and went to several stations that were set up, and I had my little audition tape in hand, my little reporter's tape in hand, and they were like, well, we're just kind of here. We don't really have anything open. They would just say it. They would just like say, we're just kind of here. We don't have anything open, no jobs. And it was very deflating, but they wanted to be able to check the box that said that they attended the National Association of Black Journalists Convention. So I think that organizations have to ask themselves and check themselves and have some checks and balances in place to say, if we go to said event, do we really have something tangible to share to these diverse candidates that are taking their time to come see us? What's in it for them, to say, to just sort of tag on what Crystal said. The other thing that I wanted to add before I go is that it's kind of taking a little bit of left turn, but just hang with me. You don't have to sit in DEI to work in DEI. And people need to know that. You shouldn't leave all of the work or progress or expectations thereof to the DEI department. You have a responsibility, again, as a human being, to show the empathy that Crystal spoke of earlier and to say, you know what can I do to make a change, to make a difference, to make an impact in my church, school, organization, company, whatever it is. And I think that it's incumbent upon us to give people the tools. Well, you can actually do this, this, and this here. Because people become complacent. They don't necessarily research things that they can do. But I feel like we need to take more of a responsibility on an individual basis as members of a greater community, the community being our organizations, to say, you know what, it's not just up to the DEI department, it's up to me as well. And I'm going to take some action. So I wanted to share that before I go as well. So where can people find me? They can find me here on LinkedIn, Heidi Barker Media, HEIDIBARKER Media, MEDIA. And I am Heidi B Media on Twitter, Instagram, Clubhouse, and a few other forums. So Dan, thank you so much for thinking of me. And I hope to do it again soon. I hope we can do it again. This was a great conversation.
Absolutely. So I want to thank you for being here. I know Krista has to leave. I'm going to bring Ishan back, and she's going to take the place of Heidi for a moment because I want to make sure we do continue the conversation a little bit. So we have Ishan back. Crystal, I know you have to go. Where can people find you? Listen, everyone. As you're watching, Crystal is a tremendous speaker. I can't speak highly enough about her. So if you are looking for a speaker for your ERG, for your events, please make sure you're reaching out to Crystal. But Crystal, where can people find you? Do you have any final words?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn and Crystal Howard like Howard University, Crystal like crystal clear. And believe it or not, I have to say that a lot to people on how to spell my name. And it was a pleasure connecting with everyone. And I'll just leave with this, is we all have a moral obligation. DEI takes a village. It's not just like Heidi said, she's right. It's not just on the person who's actually doing it as a job, but everybody has that ability to make one new change in your workday to make someone else's life better. So thank you so much again. And I hope everyone has a great day.
I appreciate you, Crystal. Thank you so much for being here. I'm coming on because now we have a spot for 3. So first of all, I want to say thank you to Fulgence. I don't want to go. I don't want to sort of finish without going over to you to answer the question, which I'm now skipping my mind of what we're actually talking about. But in terms of that visual representation, do you feel like that's a big issue? I feel like that's probably not a great question. I'm trying to think of this because now that it's the 3 of us, I want to look and I want to make sure we highlight what's actually some of the pertinent. So, Ishan, who's just tremendous, works a lot in child welfare. You've worked in you're in the nonprofit space. So here will be my question for both of you. At a very granular level, for those that are looking to get into this work at the ground floor, what are some practical things that could be done? Things that they could do, contributions that they could make to get involved and start making a difference?
So, from just from experience, and thank you, Dan, for asking that question. Is for me, back in 2010, we had the major earthquake in Haiti, right? and it was devastating. And it like I didn't know that it would hit me that hard, emotionally, mentally, physically, everything, right? And there was one evening, that evening, I literally like was crying myself to sleep. And I was like praying to God, I was like, God, please, like, if you can just teleport me to Haiti right now, like, I just want to get there hands on. What can I do? Anything I can do, like, just bring me down there. And I just want to like help out because this is like killing me, right? The next day, I get a call from one of my best friends. He was working for the New York Mets at the time, and he said, "Listen, I'm looking to donate to some nonprofits. For Haiti. We can do a spirit day at the stadium, and all the proceeds will go towards a nonprofit of your choice." And I asked him if he can donate to a particular organization I was working with at that time. And also that next day, I basically walked into that nonprofit and I just asked if I can volunteer. What can I do to help? On the on since we're not able to go there on the ground, like what can I do to help? And I literally basically took my 9 to 5, and I basically lessen my hours so I can just do more volunteer work, and helping however I can, right? And that landed me a job in nonprofit. That landed me a job right there. And I've seen that during my 12 years of tenure, people coming in through the doors and they just want to say, hey, how can I help? And some of them are still with the organization to this very day, right? Just being able to I just care about the community. I want to help. I just want to be hands on, however I can contribute, and it's like just those human beings who just have a passion. It's not about the money. It's not about themselves. It's just about care for the community. And not only that, we've been able to see those volunteers, and become social workers, navigation service providers, therapists, right? Fitness instructors, safe space, host a safe space for the LGBTQIA plus community, right? In addition to that, it's just been a blessing to work in that type of environment. It's been a blessing to work with people who look like me, and regardless of their background, and also other community partners, whether it's hospitals, health insurance companies, universities, right? And having all these people and like students who have these opportunities there in front of them, is like, oh my gosh, look at these organizations where people look like me and I could actually volunteer there and do some work and try to make an impact. It's been a very uh, amazing, incredible blessing for me.
What I'll share, what people can do to take action. I think the point was made earlier that everyone is responsible to have some hand in this. Within your role, within your position, you have authority over yourself, over the decisions that you make that are daily decisions, weekly decisions, monthly, annual decisions. You have an authority in those decisions that has been granted to you within the role that you have. And so, how can you make decisions differently within that role and within that authority to move the needle? We often get overwhelmed about the sheer amount of work, the sheer amount of change that it would take in order to really see some change systemically or institutionally for lots of people. But that all starts with one act, one decision at a time. And so if we can focus on the daily decisions that we make that either advance, help, or harm others, right? If we focus there, that's a place to start. And the other thing I'll say is exposure, right? Go to the communities, learn something from other people, and not in the performative way of like, teach me what you know, right? There is more than enough education, resources out there for folks to educate themselves on different topics, but do that work and take personal responsibility to do so. And if you need, get an accountability partner. Chris said earlier, accountability is a symptom, and that's absolutely true. But if you have measures in place, you have things in place to hold yourself accountable, you're more likely to do those things. Last thing I'll say is start with the things that you love, right? We talked about earlier that people don't move unless they see self-interest, self-value in it. So start in the spaces that you love, right? That you want to make more inclusive, that you want to see spaces of belonging in grow, that you want to see more equity in. That's where you start. because you'll be more passionate about it. You'll be more focused on it because it's something that you already love. So individual decisions, self-educate, and start where you love.
So I'm going to go over to Lori. And Lori, first of all, welcome back. After that, I'm going to go into final words from all of you. And then I'll kind of come on to finish some things up, and we'll go into our outro. I just want to let everybody know what's going on right now. So Lori, thank you again for being back. What about you? How do you feel about this?
I think it's so important to I like lead with the heart, right? I think that's a really important piece. Oftentimes, when we talk about DEI, one of the things that we do talk about is disadvantaged populations that are under the legal realm of protection. So, being under 40 years old, there's certain things that ageism just doesn't qualify for young early careers. And there's a lot of young early careers that are struggling. And I specifically work with our early careers population because I have a passion for it. Developed a whole program just to help guide people. Developed a lot of the people I work with are first generation. Some of them are second generation. And there's a part of coming from a different country to America. There's a second part of it's your first time going to school and not knowing because you hadn't had those meetings at the dinner table discussing, what to expect. And so there's a lot of people who feel alone, and I we have to take these different spaces and we have to look at them and we have to say, how can we make the world a better place by providing a discussion, by having a conversation, by looking at the gaps? Because when we talk about access, and we've talked about access at different points, the first access and the point is probably what preschool you went to. And that's really where it started, right? Those specific accesses and doors opening for you allowed for other doors to open for you. And when we think about representation, we have to look at where those gaps are and why certain people may not do well. And I think we have to be open to have that conversation with everyone because you don't know their story. And looking at a person, you don't know what struggle that they have been through. I I always open up my door. I work with several groups of people, all different races, from, you know, you can name pretty much everything because number one, I want to learn about them as an individual. Number two, the space that I'm in, I can be an advocate and ally for them no matter what background they may have. And so people reach out to me, hey, Lori, I'm trying to find a job. I'm in the middle of a recession. What do I need to do? And I think we have to be that voice to see what types of gaps are people experiencing and how can we open doors that have been closed and shut.
That's, opening extremely, extremely powerful. Um, and I think that's the big thing as we approach on these topics. It really is all about opening doors. This discussion is meant to open a door to another discussion. That discussion is meant to open doors to other discussions. When Ishan goes and speaks, when I go and do my keynotes, this is all meant to bridge and open additional doors. And the reason we do that is because we understand that there's going to be somebody coming in behind us that wouldn't have had the opportunity to walk through that door if we didn't open it for them.
Mm-hmm.
If we didn't have the courage to step out, because this is the difference, y'all. This is the difference between being an ally and an accomplice. This is part of being an active participant in change. And that's why we have these conversations. I could sit here all day talking about this. Everybody knows I got a big mouth. But I want to be respectful of everybody's time. before I go into sort of the closing segment, I did want to ask each of you, and I know you already did this a little bit, Ishan, but if you want to reiterate, I'm absolutely fine if you, because I know that we think as we go through these things, and we may have additional perspectives that we want to share. And I'm so grateful for each of you for being here. Uh, Final words, and then again, where people could find you. Um, there may be a list that we need for Fulgens, so if that's the case, I'll write it out, or Anna can in the comments. So let's do this. Ishan, Lori, and then Fulgens.
Sure, thank you. So my final thoughts is that this was within your power and control, right? It's an individual thing that will turn into a people thing that turns into a society thing. And if you can start with yourself and do little things every single day, that will add up. But be intentional about your impact. And you can find me at www.ishanpeterson.com or on LinkedIn, Ishan Peterson. That's ESHAWN, last name Peterson, PETERSON. As I shared earlier, I am dropping a podcast in October. It's called Cross Your Legs at the Ankle. You'll be able to find it where you can find all podcasts. It's a real raw, bold perspectives on being a woman in today's society. And I am an equity leadership coach. And so if you need coaching or have opportunities to speak, you can certainly reach out to me on my website. Thank you so much, everyone.
The most important message that I want to share with you today is to be intentional in your actions. Be willing to listen to others and learn from others. I learn something new every day. I make sure to read several different articles and gain several different perspectives from my own. And I take that with me. I think leadership is like a plant. You have to water it every day so it can grow and blossom. And so what I want to offer you guys today is, just being open in this perspective and hopefully open some doors with that. And I offer keynotes as well as workshops, and I can be reached at Lori Thibodeau on LinkedIn. And I spell Lori with an E. I just want to reiterate that for all my certificates that I've ever received without my E. But yeah, so definitely let's continue this conversation, and I'll pass it over.
Mr. Fulgens, Mr. Henry.
Yes. Care about the work that you're doing, or else find other work. Because if you don't care about it, I don't see how you're going to make an actual impact in the work that you do. And I like to take this moment to thank you and acknowledge you, Dan, for all that you do, for opening up this platform, for the opportunities that you bring to not only me, but to everybody. And I'm just like, I'm so blessed that we were able to connect. I'm so blessed that we're able to work together and that we're in the same community. So thank you so much. You can find me on Fulgens Henry everywhere. I think I'm the only Fulgens Henry. So I love to connect with you all here on LinkedIn and any other platforms. If you just search for Fulgens Henry, I should be able to pop up because I like to check out all the different social media apps. Every week, Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I host 2 live shows for the ECAM Live community with my extremely better half, Anna Hill. And she spells her name in all lowercase. Don't mess it up. It's lowercase ANA, lowercase GIL. Please do not mess that up. We are in the ECAM Live community where we it's an amazing community. If you check out the ECAM Live YouTube channel, you'll find our shows and our content there. You can also look up ECAM Network on right here on LinkedIn as well. Thank you.
Yes, and Ecamm is one of our sponsors, as well as Opus Clips and Giza Coffee. And I do have to shout out Anna because Anna plays a big role for me as far as helping me out and talking to me. And even though she messages me at 5 a.m, because she never remembers that I'm on the West Coast. So please feel free to stay here for a moment until we go into the outro. So here's the thing, everyone. I want to be very clear. The reason that we had these guests, the reason that we did this, and the reason that I acted as the facilitator in this situation was because it's really important that we provide people platforms to speak, that we open these doors, as these three have stated. When I created the 6-part newsletter series, the DEI Playbook, over the last couple of months, I knew that I was already writing my piece. You could read what my personal opinion is. So once my opinion is out, now it's time to elevate others. Now it's time for people to hear what Fulgence and Chris and Lori and Ishan and Crystal and Sharita and Heidi have to say, and many more that asked to be on this particular program. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't include anybody else. Otherwise, we might have broken the platform, which it feels like we already did. So before we go, I have to be honest with everybody about two things. This is a very bittersweet event for me. I've put on events for the last 4 years on LinkedIn, and every time I do, more and more work goes into it. This particular program took about 80 hours to put together. Everything, you could look at my recent posts. At this point, this will be my last event for the time being until I'm able to generate sponsorship, paid sponsorship, that would allow me to make money for doing this, because it is an extremely tedious process. And that's not being selfish. It's just understanding that we have to pick and choose where we spend our time. And though I love doing it, there's certain things that happen. So here's what I would have to say. If you are interested in having Fulgence and I and Anna produce your events, please feel free to reach out. If you're interested in sponsoring my future events, please let me know. This does not mean that I'm going to stop having these conversations. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is what I love. And this is my mission in life. What it does mean is that until we figure out a way to collaborate collectively, this will be my last event for the time being. However, in September, Future Kane and I will be back with Healing Our Future, which is the weekly podcast that I do produce for my mentor, for my family member and friend. There are 1 million people on LinkedIn that you have not heard of that are absolutely dynamic in this space. If you follow the 7 of us that were here today, well, 8 of us, including me, you're going to be led to people like Aisha Joseph. You're going to be led to individuals like Latanya Davis, people that are Rosemary Campbell Stevens, John Graham Jr. You're going to be led to people that are doing this work with really, they're not getting anything from it other than to progress the message. And that's why we have to do this. This is the work that we do. It has to continue. So I urge you, please keep on having these conversations. And please, if you are somebody that has acted in a way where you are just passively supporting, figure out ways that you could take a look at what the real reason for the issues that you're facing are, and how can you question why those things are happening, and then how can you create solutions within your own communities so that we could create a better world. Because here's the thing, and this is what I'm going to end on before we go to the outro, and this is so important. The way society was created was so that the top 2% do not have to give things up. The thing is, when we open ourselves up to letting others in and letting others shine, we're not giving up anything. We're gaining. Please open your eyes. Please. From my heart to all of you, thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Ecamm. Thank you, Opus Clips. We will be doing live replays for multiple audiences. I appreciate you. I'm going into our outro. Please stay tuned for the end of our outro because you'll enjoy it. Bye, everyone.